What is the true price of a single, cruel word? For Dieter Rutherford, a man who measured life in stock prices and quarterly earnings, the answer was a staggering 200 million. For his perfectly manicured girlfriend, Tiffany Beaumont, it was the abrupt end of a life built on someone else's success. And for Calista Vera, the woman they openly humiliated for her accent, it was simply the final piece of data she needed. She was the waitress serving them their vintage wine one evening, but she was also the investor they were desperately trying to impress the next morning. They just didn't know it yet. This is the story of how a moment of arrogance shattered an empire and proved that the most powerful person in the room isn't always the one who speaks the loudest, but the one who listens the most. The restaurant was called Ethelgard's, a name as stuffy and pretentious as its clientele. It was a cathedral of modern fine dining in the heart of downtown. All dark wood, muted gold accents, and lighting so strategically dim it could hide a multitude of sins, or at the very least a few wrinkles on the faces of its patrons. For the staff, the dimness was a double-edged sword. It hid their exhaustion, but also magnified every mistake. A single clink of a dropped fork could sound like a thunderclap in the reverent hush. Calista Vera, known here only as Kali, moved through this space with a practiced grace that belied the ache in her feet. For the past 3 weeks, she had been a ghost in a crisp black uniform, observing, listening, and serving. Her official role was senior waitstaff, a position she'd secured with a fabricated resume that spoke of years in European hospitality. The truth was far more complex. The only part of her resume that was real was her origin, which was betrayed by the soft, melodic lilt in her English, an accent that rounded her vowels and softened her consonants. It was a ghost of her mother tongue, a sound she had never felt the need to erase. Tonight was her final shift, the culmination of an unorthodox, self-imposed mission. Her section was relatively quiet until they arrived. Dieter Rutherford strode in as if he owned the very air the other patrons breathed. He was the tech world's golden boy, the CEO of Aura Innovations, a company on the precipice of a major global expansion. His suit was a custom Brioni, his watch a Patek Philippe that cost more than a car, and his smile was a weapon, deployed with strategic charm. On his arm was Tiffany Beaumont, a woman who looked less like a person and more like an art installation curated by Instagram. Her dress was a sliver of silk, her diamonds were blinding, and her expression was one of permanent, bored disdain. She scanned the room not for its beauty but for its flaws, and for anyone who might be important enough to notice her. Calista approached their table, a water carafe in hand. "Good evening. Welcome to Ethelgard's. May I start you with some water? We have still or sparkling." Dieter was already tapping at his phone, but Tiffany's eyes narrowed on Calista's face, her gaze sharp and analytical. "We'll have sparkling. San Pellegrino. And make sure it's cold. The last time we were here, it was practically lukewarm," Tiffany said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Of course, madam. I will bring it immediately," Calista replied, her accent curling gently around the words. Tiffany's lips tightened into a smirk. She leaned toward Dieter, her voice a stage whisper designed to be overheard. "Did you hear that? How quaint. It's like we've been served by a character from a spy movie." Dieter glanced up from his phone, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes that wasn't directed at Tiffany. He offered Calista a tight, dismissive smile. "Just the water, please." Calista gave a slight, professional nod and walked away, her back straight, her expression unreadable. She was used to being invisible, but this was different. This was being seen, but only as a caricature. She retrieved the water in a chilled bucket, her movements fluid and economical. As she poured the San Pellegrino into their delicate crystal glasses, she listened. Their conversation was the reason she was here, in this uniform, enduring this charade. "The Vera Global Ventures deal is practically sealed," Dieter boasted, finally putting his phone down. "Frank Garrison, my COO, says their lead representative is flying in tomorrow. Their old-world European money, ridiculously private. No photos, no interviews. They just want to see the final pitch and sign the papers." 200 million, you said? Tiffany asked, preening slightly as she checked her reflection in the back of a spoon. "We should celebrate. A trip to St. Bart's? Or maybe I could finally get that new G-Wagon. Once the ink is dry, darling, you can have whatever you want," Dieter promised. This funding catapults Aura into the stratosphere. It solidifies my legacy. Callista placed the wine list on their table. Would you care to see the sommelier, or may I help you with a selection? Tiffany waved a dismissive hand, not even looking at her. We know what we want, the 21 Chateau Margaux, and decant it properly this time. She then looked directly at Callista, a cruel glint in her eye. Can you handle that? Chateau Margaux, she repeated, exaggerating the syllables in a crude parody of a French accent, before looking at Dieter and giggling. Callista felt a familiar heat rise in her chest, a feeling she had learned to master long ago. It was the fire of indignation, but she had trained it to be a furnace, not a wildfire. It forged resolve, not reckless anger. An excellent choice, madam, Callista said, her voice perfectly level, her own accent now feeling less like a part of her and more like a target painted on her back. I will bring it right away. As she walked toward the wine cellar, she passed her co-worker, Leo, a kind-eyed university student working to pay his tuition. He had seen the interaction and gave her a look of sympathetic outrage. Don't let them get to you, Kaylee, he whispered. They're infamous. All money. No class. Callista offered him a small, genuine smile. It is just noise, Leo. People like that. They cannot help but show you who they truly are. But inside, it wasn't just noise. It was confirmation. She had spent the last year investigating Aura innovations for her family's investment firm, Vera Global Ventures. She had analyzed their financials, their market strategy, their growth potential. All of it was impeccable on paper. But her father had taught her a crucial lesson. A company is not its balance sheet, it is its people, especially its leader. And to truly understand a leader, you couldn't sit across from them in a boardroom where their best behavior was on display. You had to see them when they thought no one of consequence was watching. So Callista Vera, heir and chief strategist for a multi-billion-dollar global fund, had become Callie, the waitress. And tonight, Dieter Rutherford, the man asking for her family's $200 million, was giving her the most honest performance of his life. The Chateau Margaux was a thing of beauty, a deep garnet liquid that promised stories of sun-drenched French vineyards in every drop. Callista handled the bottle with the reverence it deserved, her movements precise as she presented it to Dieter. The 2021 Chateau Margaux, sir, she stated clearly. Dieter barely glanced at it, waving his hand impatiently. Yes, just open it. Tiffany watched Callista like a hawk, her lips curled in that same perpetual sneer. As Callista expertly uncorked the bottle, the soft pop echoed the silent tension at the table. She poured a small amount into Dieter's glass for him to taste. He swirled it, sniffed it with the air of a connoisseur, and took a sip. Fine, he declared, nodding for her to proceed. Callista began to decant the wine, pouring it in a steady, careful stream into the crystal decanter. It was a delicate process, one that required focus. It was in this moment of concentration that Tiffany decided to strike. You know, Tiffany began, her voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. I was just thinking, Dieter, your new software, the one that translates languages in real time? You should test it on our waitress. She could say something, and the app could tell us what she actually means in plain English. The jab was so audacious, so publicly cruel, that a hush fell over the immediate area. A couple at the next table stopped their conversation, their eyes wide. Dieter shifted uncomfortably in his seat. This was beyond the pale, even for Tiffany. It was creating a scene. Tiffany, please, he muttered, his voice low. But Tiffany was on a roll, emboldened by the attention. She looked at Callista, who continued to pour the wine with unshakable steadiness. Tell me, Tiffany cooed, leaning forward, where is that accent from? It's so thick. Is it Russia? Did you come here on a boat? She then put on a grotesque, cartoonish imitation of a Slavic accent. Da, comrade, I bring you potato wine. She burst into a high-pitched laugh. Dieter, seeing the disapproving looks from other diners, tried to salvage the situation with a weak, placating smile. Darling, you've had too much champagne. Callista finished decanting the wine. She placed the decanter on the table, her movements deliberate. Her face was a mask of professional neutrality, but her eyes, had anyone looked closely enough, held a glint of cold, hard appraisal. She wasn't just a waitress being insulted. She was a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope, and the specimen was revealing its most toxic properties. She straightened up and looked not at Tiffany, but directly at Dieter. She had to know. Would he correct this? Would he show an ounce of leadership, of basic human decency? "Is there anything else I can get for you at this moment, sir?" she asked, her voice calm and even. Her accent was still there, a quiet defiance against their mockery. Dieter couldn't meet her gaze. He looked at his wine glass, at Tiffany, anywhere but at the woman his partner was systematically humiliating. "No, that's all for now," he mumbled, his discomfort palpable. He did nothing. He said nothing to defend her. He implicitly endorsed the cruelty. That was it. That was the final data point Callista needed. His silence was more damning than Tiffany's vitriol. It spoke of a profound weakness of character, an unwillingness to stand for what was right when it was inconvenient. A leader who couldn't manage a simple dinner table conflict with integrity certainly couldn't be trusted to manage a $200 million investment in a global company. As Callista turned to leave, Tiffany delivered her parting shot. "Try not to drop the plates, dear. I'm sure they don't pay you enough to cover the damages. Or maybe they do in rubles?" Callista didn't look back. She walked toward the kitchens, her composure a shield. Leo intercepted her just before she passed through the swinging doors. "Kaylee, that was horrible. I'm so sorry. I can tell the manager, Mr. Dubois. He'll throw them out," he said, his face flushed with anger on her behalf. Callista put a hand on his arm, her expression softening for the first time that night. "Thank you, Leo. Your kindness means more than you know. But please do not. Let them enjoy their dinner. They are creating a very memorable experience." Leo looked confused by her calm demeanor. "But some people build their own cages, Leo, and they don't even realize they are locked inside." She retreated into the clamor of the kitchen, the sounds of clattering dishes and shouting chefs, a welcome chaos after the focused cruelty of the dining room. She took a deep breath, not of anger, but of clarity. The decision had been made. The numbers on the page had told her Aura Innovations was a good investment. The man at that table had just told her it was a catastrophic one. For the rest of their meal, Callista had Leo take over, serving their table. She didn't want to give them another opportunity to perform their particular brand of ugliness. She watched from a distance as they laughed and drank the expensive wine, oblivious. They believed they were the predators and she was the prey. They had no idea that the entire encounter had been a test, and they had failed in a way that would soon become spectacularly, publicly clear. Her shift ended at 11 p.m. She untied her apron for the last time, changed out of her uniform into simple black trousers and a silk blouse, and said her goodbyes to Leo and the kitchen staff. She thanked Mr. Dubois for the opportunity, leaving him with a generous tip for the entire floor staff. She walked out of Ethelgard's grand entrance, not into a bus or a subway, but to a discreet black Audi A8 waiting for her at the corner. A man in a dark suit, her head of security, opened the door for her. As she settled into the plush leather seat, she pulled out her phone. She didn't call a friend to vent. She didn't post an angry message on social media. She dialed a single number. It was answered on the first ring. "Ms. Vera, how was your evening?" The voice was calm, British, and belonged to Adrian Henderson, the lead counsel for Vera Global Ventures. Callista looked out the window as the glittering city lights blurred past. Ethelgard's, with its golden glow, receded in the distance. "The reconnaissance is complete, Adrian," she said, her accent now sounding not like a vulnerability, but like the voice of authority it was. "The dinner was illuminating. We are pulling the offer, all of it." There was a moment of silence on the other end. "May I ask what happened? The due diligence was flawless." Callista's lips curved into a wry, mirthless smile. "The due diligence missed the most critical variable, character. Mr. Rutherford's is bankrupt, and I will not invest in a bankrupt man." She paused, thinking of Tiffany's sneering face. "Cancel my 10 a.m. flight back to Zurich. Instead, please confirm my attendance at the Aura Innovations pitch meeting tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. I believe it's time for the lead representative of Vera Global Ventures to make a personal appearance." The transition from Kali the waitress to Callista Vera was not just a change of clothes. It was a reclamation of self. Back in her suite at the Four Seasons, overlooking the sprawling city, the black uniform lay folded on a chair, a relic of a completed mission. In its place, she selected her armor for the morning. A bespoke navy blue power suit by Max Mara, a crisp white silk shirt, and understated but priceless sapphire earrings that matched her eyes. As she prepared, her mind replayed the events at the restaurant. It wasn't the personal sting of the insults that occupied her thoughts. She had faced far worse in her life, navigating the male-dominated worlds of finance and technology as a young woman from Eastern Europe. What concerned her was the pathology of the behavior she'd witnessed. Tiffany's cruelty was a symptom. Dieter's acquiescence was the disease. Her father, a man who had built their empire from the ashes of political turmoil, had a favorite saying, "A fish rots from the head down." If Dieter Rutherford, the head of Aura Innovations, tolerated that kind of toxicity in his personal life, he undoubtedly allowed it to fester in his corporate culture. A culture of arrogance and disrespect was a breeding ground for bad decisions, for cutting corners, for employee churn, and for eventual inevitable failure. An investment in Aura wouldn't just be a financial risk, it would be an ethical one. She dialed Adrian Henderson again, this time on a secure video line. His face appeared on the large screen in her living room, the backdrop of a London office behind him. "Good morning, Callista. All set for 9 a.m. I've informed them that a senior partner will be attending in person. They have no idea it's you. They're expecting a Mr. Petrov, I believe." "A common assumption," Callista said with a dry smile. "Let them be surprised. Adrian, I need you to do a deep dive, effective immediately. I want a full social and professional background check on a Tiffany Beaumont. I want to know everything, her connections, her sources of income, her history with Mr. Rutherford. I have a feeling her influence is a liability that extends beyond the dinner table." "Consider it done," Adrian replied, already typing. "What is your angle for the meeting? Will you simply withdraw?" Callista walked over to the window, gazing down at the city as it began to stir. "A simple withdrawal is too quiet. It allows Mr. Rutherford to create his own narrative, to blame market fluctuations or unforeseen circumstances. No, this requires a lesson. A public one would be too vulgar. A private one, however, one that reverberates through his entire company and board, that has value." She turned back to the screen. "I will let him give his entire presentation. I want to see him perform. I want him to feel the thrill of securing his legacy. And then, when he is at the very peak of his confidence, I will explain, in meticulous detail, why Vera Global Ventures would not give him a single dollar if he were the last investment on Earth. And I will use the events of last night as my primary case study." Adrian allowed a rare, thin smile. "Brutal and effective. The board will be present?" "The entire executive board, including his COO, Frank Garrison, who our initial reports suggest is a competent, if currently overshadowed, operator. They need to hear it. They need to understand the risk their CEO represents." After the call, Callista sat and reviewed the Aura Innovations file one last time. The technology was brilliant. A revolutionary AI-driven logistics software that could streamline global supply chains with unprecedented efficiency. It had the potential to change industries. The potential was what had drawn her in. But potential is just a seed. It needs the right soil to grow. The soil at Aura, she now knew, was toxic. Her mind drifted to Leo, the young waiter. His instinctive kindness, his immediate and unsolicited defense of a stranger. He represented the opposite of Dieter's world. He was the kind of person you could build a team, a company, a future around. People like Leo were assets. People like Dieter and Tiffany were liabilities, wrapped in expensive packaging. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her research team with the preliminary file on Tiffany Beaumont. It was exactly as she suspected. Tiffany was the daughter of a minor real estate developer whose business had gone bankrupt 5 years prior. She had no independent career or income. Her entire lifestyle, the designer clothes, the luxury car, the social standing, was funded entirely by Dieter. She wasn't his partner. She was his most expensive accessory, and her influence was insidious. The file noted several instances where promising female executives at Aura had left the company after clashing with Tiffany at corporate social events. She saw them as competition. The final piece of the puzzle slotted into place. This wasn't just about a rude girlfriend. This was about a CEO who allowed his personal life and poor judgment to actively damage his own company's talent pool. Callista closed the file. There was no longer any doubt. There was only a path forward. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the window. The woman staring back was not the quiet, unassuming waitress from the night before. This was Callista Vera, and she was ready for the boardroom. The time for observation was over. The time for accountability had begun. The headquarters of Aura Innovations was a monument to modern corporate ambition. Located in the gleaming heart of the financial district, it was a steel and glass tower that scraped the sky. The lobby was an exercise in minimalist grandeur, a cavernous space with white marble floors, a 30-foot living green wall, and a single imposing brushed steel desk. Dieter Rutherford strode through this lobby at 8:30 a.m., feeling like a king surveying his domain. Today was the culmination of a year of relentless work. The Vera deal was more than just money. It was validation. It would silence the doubters, skyrocket his personal wealth, and cement his status as a true titan of industry. He was in his element, dressed in a sharp Tom Ford suit, radiating confidence. He'd already forgotten about the unpleasantness at the restaurant. To him, the waitress was a non-entity, a brief and insignificant annoyance in the grand narrative of his success. His mind was on the presentation, the numbers, and the triumphant press release he'd already drafted in his head. Upstairs in the 50th floor boardroom, his team was making the final preparations. The room was designed to intimidate and impress. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window offering a breathtaking panoramic view of the city. A long, polished mahogany table reflected the recessed lighting above, with a dozen plush leather chairs arranged around it. At the head of the table, a massive screen displayed the Aura Innovations logo, pulsing gently. Frank Garrison, the COO, was pacing nervously, double-checking the presentation slides on his tablet. He was a stark contrast to Dieter, older, more grounded, with a quiet competence that often went overlooked. "Everything is set, Dieter," Frank said as the CEO entered. "The board members are dialing in via video conference, and Mr. Henderson from Vera's legal team has just arrived. He said their senior partner's on the way up." "Excellent," Dieter boomed, clapping Frank on the back. "Let's get ready to knock this out of the park." Just then, his office door swung open, and Tiffany Beaumont sauntered in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She was dressed for a victory lap, wearing a vibrant red dress that was more suited for a cocktail party than a 9 a.m. business meeting. "One for my conquering hero," she purred, handing a cup to Dieter and kissing him on the cheek. "I wanted to be here to see the moment you become a legend." Frank Garrison visibly tensed. He had long considered Tiffany a distracting, unprofessional influence, but Dieter was blind to it. "Darling, you probably shouldn't be in here for the actual meeting," Dieter said, though his tone was soft. "Oh, don't be silly," Tiffany scoffed, settling into a chair at the far end of the room as if she belonged there. "I'll be as quiet as a mouse. I just want to see the looks on their faces when they agree to throw all that money at you. It's a turn-on." Dieter, flattered and unwilling to cause a scene, relented. "Fine, but please, not a word." Meanwhile, in the elevator ascending to the 50th floor, Callista stood calmly beside Adrian Henderson. "The preliminary report on Ms. Beaumont was illuminating," Adrian said quietly. "She's a financial dependent with a history of creating personnel issues for the company. A clear liability." "She is a mirror, Adrian," Callista replied, her gaze fixed on the ascending floor numbers. "She reflects the judgment of the man who keeps her by his side. It tells us everything we need to know about his decision-making." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. They stepped out into a serene reception area. A young woman at a desk stood up, looking flustered. "Good morning. Welcome to Aura Innovations. You must be, with Mr. Henderson?" she asked, her eyes scanning for the Mr. Petrov she had been told to expect. "I am Callista Vera," Callista said, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet space. She extended a hand. "We are here for the 9 a.m. meeting with Mr. Rutherford." The receptionist shook her hand, a look of confusion on her face. "Of course, Ms. Vera. Right this way." She led them down a hallway to the boardroom. She knocked softly before pushing the heavy glass door open. "Mr. Rutherford, Mr. Henderson, and Ms. Vera are here." Dieter was standing at the head of the table, schmoozing with the video conference images of his board members on the screen. He turned, his face wreathed in a practiced, welcoming smile. "Adrian, wonderful to see you again. And you must be—" His voice trailed off. His smile froze, then melted away, replaced by a mask of utter, uncomprehending shock. His eyes widened. His jaw went slack. He was staring at the woman walking through the door. It was the waitress. It was the woman from Ethelgard's, the woman with the accent, the woman his girlfriend had mercilessly mocked just hours before. But she wasn't wearing a black uniform. She was wearing a suit that cost more than his monthly mortgage and carried a leather briefcase with the embossed insignia of Vera Global Ventures. Her hair was styled immaculately. Her expression was one of cool, unassailable authority, and her eyes held his with an intensity that stripped him bare. Across the room, Tiffany, who had been scrolling through her phone, looked up to see what had caused the sudden silence. Her own face went through a rapid-fire series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, a dawning horror, and finally pale-faced panic. The blood drained from her face. The coffee cup in her hand trembled. The waitress was here, and she was walking toward the head of the table. The silence in the boardroom was absolute, a thick, heavy blanket that smothered all sound. The faces of the board members on the screen looked on with confusion, wondering what had caused their charismatic CEO to suddenly look as if he'd seen a ghost. Frank Garrison, standing by the presentation screen, frowned, sensing a seismic shift in the room's atmosphere that he couldn't understand. Callista walked calmly to the empty chair at the head of the table, directly opposite Dieter. She placed her briefcase on the mahogany surface with a soft, definitive click. Adrian Henderson took a seat beside her, opening a folder with quiet professionalism. She looked at Dieter, whose face was a canvas of pale disbelief. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish out of water. "Mr. Rutherford," Callista began, her voice crisp and clear. Her accent was the same as the night before, but in this context it was no longer quaint or foreign. It was the sound of power, of immense, world-shaping wealth. "We have met before, though you may not remember me. I served you the 2021 Chateau Margaux last night at Ethelgard's." The statement landed like a grenade in the silent room. Frank Garrison's eyes shot from Callista to Dieter, a sudden, horrified understanding dawning on his face. He remembered Dieter mentioning a dinner at Ethelgard's. On the screen, the board members began murmuring to one another, their expressions changing from confusion to alarm. But all eyes were on Tiffany. She had shrunk in her chair at the far end of the room, looking small and terrified. She looked as if she desperately wanted the floor to swallow her whole. The woman she had belittled, mocked, and treated as less than human was the very person whose favor they were all here to curry. Dieter finally found his voice, a strangled, desperate rasp. There must be some mistake. I am Callista Vera," she finished for him, her gaze unwavering. "Lead strategist and final signatory for Vera Global Ventures. My family's fund operates on a simple principle passed down from my father. We invest in people first, ideas second. For the past year, we have been incredibly impressed with Aura's ideas. So for the past 3 weeks, I have been in your city to conduct the final stage of our due diligence on your people, specifically on you, Mr. Rutherford." She let that sink in. The implication was horrifyingly clear. His final test hadn't been in the boardroom. It had been in the restaurant. "I took a job at a restaurant I knew you frequented," she continued, her tone methodical, like a prosecutor laying out an irrefutable case. "I wanted to observe you in an environment where you were not on, where you believed you were surrounded by staff, by subordinates, by people you deemed unimportant. I wanted to see the true character of the man to whom we were considering entrusting $200 million. Dieter's face was ashen. He risked a glance at Tiffany, whose expression was one of pure, unadulterated terror. He finally understood the catastrophic magnitude of what had happened. He turned back to Callista, his voice now a desperate plea. "Ms. Vera, I had no idea. Last night was a misunderstanding. A poor joke. It was completely inappropriate, and I am so sorry." He shot a venomous glare at Tiffany. My guest was out of line." Callista raised a hand, stopping him cold. "Please, Mr. Rutherford, do not insult my intelligence by shifting the blame. Your guest was indeed cruel, but you were complicit. Her behavior was a reflection of a culture you condone, a culture of arrogance, disrespect, and punching down. It was a culture where the powerful feel entitled to humiliate those they perceive as beneath them." She then turned her attention, for the first time, to Tiffany. Her gaze was not angry. It was far worse. It was dismissive. "And you, Ms. Beaumont," Callista said, her voice dropping slightly, "taught me something valuable as well. You showed me that Mr. Rutherford surrounds himself with people who lack integrity, professionalism, and basic human decency. You revealed him as a man with profoundly poor judgment in his personal, and, I can now only assume, his professional associations." Tiffany flinched as if struck. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Callista turned her focus back to the stunned faces in the room and on the screen. "Gentlemen of the board, Mr. Garrison, we came here today prepared to sign an agreement that would have funded Aura's global expansion. Your technology is brilliant. Your financials are sound. But a company is like a great ship. It can be the most technologically advanced vessel in the world, but if its captain is weak, if he allows rot to fester in the hull, it will sink in the first storm." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. "And last night, I saw the rot. I experienced it firsthand. Therefore, Vera Global Ventures is officially and immediately withdrawing our offer of funding. We will not be investing in Aura Innovations, not $1. She stood up, her movement signaling the finality of the verdict. "Furthermore," she added, her voice sharp, "we will be sharing our findings on the company's leadership culture with our partners in the financial community. Character, gentlemen, is also a commodity." The boardroom erupted. Dieter lunged forward, his hands on the table. "No, please, you can't. This will ruin us. It was one dinner, one stupid mistake." The board members on the screen were all shouting at once, their voices a cacophony of panicked questions. But Callista simply looked at him with an expression of cold pity. "It was not one mistake, Mr. Rutherford," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "It was a choice. You chose to be silent. You chose to enable cruelty. And now, you must live with the consequences of that choice. We are done here." With that, she turned, and with Adrian Henderson by her side, she walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind the shattered remnants of Dieter Rutherford's legacy. The door clicked shut behind her, the sound as final as a gavel strike. The moment the boardroom door closed behind Callista Vera, the fragile veneer of corporate decorum shattered completely. Dieter Rutherford slumped into his chair as if his strings had been cut, his face a mask of abject horror. The future he had so carefully constructed had evaporated in less than 10 minutes. "What have you done?" he hissed, his voice trembling with a rage born of pure panic. He wasn't looking at the board or Frank Garrison. His eyes were locked on Tiffany, who was still frozen in her chair, tears silently streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "Me," she squeaked, her voice barely a whisper. "How was I supposed to know? You were supposed to have some class, some basic human decency," Dieter roared, slamming his fist on the table. "You couldn't just be civil for one night. You had to perform your little Queen of the Manor act and cost me everything." On the video screen, the lead board member, a formidable older man named Jonathan Cole, cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the chaos like a razor. "Dieter, that is enough. The young lady's behavior was appalling, but Ms. Vera was right. The failure of leadership was yours. You were the CEO at that table. You did nothing." Frank Garrison stepped forward, his expression grim. "He's right, Dieter. This goes beyond a lost deal. She said she'd be sharing her findings. She just put a character risk label on this entire company. The stock is going to get hammered when news of the failed funding round leaks. Our credibility is shot." "Fix it, Frank," Dieter pleaded, his arrogance replaced by a pathetic desperation. "Call them. Apologize. Offer them a bigger stake." "It's too late," Frank said, his voice heavy with finality. "This wasn't a negotiation. That was a verdict. She wasn't there to bargain. She was there to deliver a message. The message had been delivered, and now the fallout was beginning. Tiffany, realizing she was no longer an asset but the living embodiment of Dieter's failure, stood up on shaky legs. "Dieter, baby, we can fix this," she began, her voice pleading. "I'll write her a letter. I'll apologize publicly." Dieter looked at her with pure contempt, his affection curdled into acid. You are the last person who can fix anything. You are the problem. All of it. The entitlement, the spending, the drama. I'm done. Get out." "What?" she stammered, her eyes wide with shock. "Get out of my building. Get your things out of my penthouse. It's over. Do you understand me?" "Over," he screamed, his face contorted. He was a cornered animal, lashing out at the most convenient target. Tiffany stared at him, her world crumbling. The diamonds on her fingers suddenly felt like cheap glass. The designer dress felt like a costume. Without Dieter, she was nothing. She had no career, no income, no identity of her own. She had made her bed in his gilded cage, and she had just been violently thrown out of it. With a choked sob, she turned and fled the room. The board meeting devolved into a brutal post-mortem. Dieter was eviscerated by Jonathan Cole and the other members. His excuses were weak, his promises hollow. They saw him for what Callista had seen, a man with a fatal flaw in his character, a liability they could no longer afford. By noon, the decision was made. Dieter Rutherford was asked to tender his resignation as CEO of Aura Innovations, effective immediately. The news hit the financial wires by mid-afternoon. Aura Innovations funding deal collapses. CEO resigns amidst leadership crisis. The company's stock plunged by 40% in a single hour. The empire Dieter had built was imploding, and the shockwaves were just beginning. Meanwhile, Callista Vera was at a private airfield, boarding a Gulfstream G650 bound for Zurich. Before she boarded, she made a call. "Leo, it's Kaylee from Ethelgard's." There was a surprised silence on the other end. "Cully, hey, I heard you quit. Is everything okay?" "Everything is fine, Leo. I have a proposition for you," she said, a warm smile in her voice. "I am very impressed by your work ethic and your character. My family runs a foundation that provides educational scholarships to promising individuals. We focus on people with integrity and drive. I believe you would be a perfect candidate. We would like to cover your full university tuition and living expenses so you can focus on your studies without the burden of working nights." Leo was speechless. I don't know what to say. Are you serious? Why would you do that for me?" "Because Leo," Callista replied, watching the ground crew prepare her jet for takeoff, "kindness should be an investment, not an expense. You showed decency when it would have been easier to look away. That is a quality the world needs more of. My assistant will be in touch with the details." She ended the call, feeling a sense of satisfaction that no nine-figure business deal could ever provide. She hadn't just withdrawn an investment, she had reallocated it. She had taken a small fraction of the capital that would have been wasted on a company with a rotten core and invested it in a young man with a solid one. As the jet climbed into the sky, leaving the city and its drama far below, Callista looked out the window. She hadn't set out to destroy Dieter Rutherford. She had set out to make a wise investment. In the end, she had done both. She had protected her family's capital from a bad leader, and in the process had exposed him. The market, in its own brutal way, would handle the rest. Her work was done. The shock wave of Callista Vera's boardroom pronouncement did not dissipate, it amplified. In the weeks that followed, the financial press feasted on the carcass of Aura Innovations' reputation. Headlines screamed from digital and print media alike. Aura's $200 million deal collapses in shock upset. Rutherford out at Aura amid leadership crisis. And the one that went truly viral, a salacious think piece titled "The Waitress, the Billionaire, and the Vetting That Changed Everything." The story became a modern fable, a cautionary tale for a generation of founders who believed charisma was a substitute for character. Dieter Rutherford's fall was as swift as it was brutal. He became a ghost in the city he once ruled. The invitations stopped. The calls went unreturned. He sold the penthouse at a loss to cover his debts and moved into a sterile, soulless condominium that felt more like a waiting room than a home. Some nights he would scroll through social media, a voyeur to his own past life. He saw his former friends on yachts in the Mediterranean, at galas he should have been hosting, their photos full of the same plastic smiles they had once given him. He had never realized how transactional his entire world was until he had nothing left to transact. His ruin was a profound and lonely silence. Tiffany Beaumont's descent was more public, and in its own way, more pitiable. Stripped of Dieter's financial shield, her world of couture and champagne brunches evaporated. The social circle that had celebrated her sharp-tongued wit now shunned her for the very same cruelty. She was a liability, a walking reminder of a spectacular scandal. After weeks of failed attempts to leverage old connections, she took a job as a hostess at a trendy, second-tier restaurant in a different part of the city. One evening, a woman she had once considered a close friend walked in with a group. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, a flicker of recognition in the woman's eyes, followed by a swift, deliberate turn of her head. In that moment of being looked through as if she were glass, Tiffany finally understood the crushing weight of insignificance she had so casually inflicted on others. But while Dieter and Tiffany were consumed by the ashes of their past, Frank Garrison was painstakingly trying to build a future. He inherited a company in freefall. Employee morale was shattered, clients were spooked, and the board was breathing down his neck. He knew that superficial changes wouldn't be enough. The rot Callista had identified ran deep, and it required radical treatment. His first all-hands meeting as CEO was unlike any Aura had ever seen. He stood before his entire staff, not on a stage but on the main floor without a microphone. He didn't talk about synergy or growth metrics. He talked about the failure. What happened 2 months ago was not just a failed funding round, Frank said, his voice quiet but firm, forcing everyone to lean in and listen. It was a moral failure, a cultural failure, and it started at the top. It started with an attitude of arrogance that we mistook for confidence and a tolerance for disrespect that we mistook for strength. That ends today. He laid out his plan, which he had unofficially named the Waitress Principle, in his private notes. It was a complete cultural reset. He introduced a 360-degree review system where employees at all levels could anonymously evaluate their managers, including the CEO. He established a zero-tolerance policy for harassment and disrespect, with clear, immediate consequences. He tied executive bonuses not just to financial performance, but to metrics of employee satisfaction and retention. He was dismantling Dieter's kingdom of personality and replacing it with a republic of principles. It was a slow, arduous process. Trust once broken is not easily mended, but Frank was patient and consistent. He ate in the company cafeteria. He knew people's names. He listened. Slowly, painstakingly, the fear that had permeated the office began to be replaced by a fragile, tentative hope. The company wasn't just surviving, it was healing. 3 months after taking the helm, Frank sat alone in his office late one night, staring at the new business plan on his desk. It was solid. The technology was still groundbreaking. The team was more focused and collaborative than ever. But they were running out of time. They needed a capital injection to scale, and the scandal had made them radioactive to most major investors. There was only one path. It was the longest of long shots, a move his advisors had called professionally suicidal. But Frank knew it was the only way to truly close the circle. His hand trembled slightly as he picked up the phone and dialed the international number for the Vera Global Ventures headquarters in Zurich. He rehearsed his opening line, expecting to deliver it to a junior assistant before being politely dismissed. The call was answered. He gave his name and was put on hold. He expected a long wait, but less than a minute later, a new voice came on the line. It was crisp, calm, and instantly recognizable. "Mr. Garrison, this is Callista Vera." Frank's heart hammered against his ribs. "Ms. Vera," he began, his voice a little unsteady, "thank you for taking my call. I'm the new CEO of Aura Innovations." "I know who you are, Mr. Garrison," she replied, and there was no coldness in her voice, only a neutral professionalism. "I have been following your progress. Your changes have been impressive." Frank felt a dizzying wave of relief. She knew. She had been watching. "You have? Good. But that's not why I called. I wanted to call and personally apologize for what you experienced with our company. It was unacceptable, and it exposed a deep sickness in our culture. Please know that I am working every single day to cure it. Apology accepted, Mr. Garrison, Callista said. Actions are always the most sincere apology, and yours have been very clear. You disbanded the executive social club that was a source of exclusion, and you implemented the anonymous leadership feedback channels. Those were wise moves. He was stunned that she knew such specific details. She hadn't just been watching the headlines. She had been doing her homework. This sliver of hope emboldened him to take the final, terrifying leap. Ms. Vera, I know this is a long shot, a very long shot. Our reputation is still damaged, but the company is not the same. The people are not the same. Our technology is still revolutionary, and now it is being managed by a team built on respect, not ego. We are rebuilding from the ground up with a new foundation. I was wondering, would you ever consider taking another look at us? The silence that followed stretched for an eternity. Frank could hear the faint hum of the transatlantic line, a sound that seemed to mock the vast distance between his desperation and her power. He had laid his company's soul bare, and now he could only wait for the verdict. Mr. Garrison, Callista said finally, her tone thoughtful, my father taught me that the best time to invest is not when things are perfect, but when they are proven resilient, when they have faced the fire and have been forged into something stronger. She paused. I will be in your city next month for a conference. Send me your new business plan and your quarterly progress reports on the cultural initiatives. I am making no promises, but my firm always believes in second chances, provided they are earned. Frank closed his eyes, the relief so profound it felt like a physical weight lifting from his shoulders. Thank you, Ms. Vera. Thank you. We won't disappoint you. When the call ended, he didn't move for a full minute. He looked out the window at the city lights, the same view Dieter had once seen as a testament to his own greatness. Frank saw it as a network of human potential, a community he was now honor-bound to serve. He had not just secured a meeting, he had earned a chance at redemption. Thousands of miles away, Callista Vera ended the call and allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Revenge would have been easy, but it was a hollow victory. True power was not in the act of destruction, but in the art of reconstruction. She hadn't set out to ruin Dieter Rutherford. She had simply held up a mirror, and he had shattered against his own reflection. But in Frank Garrison, she saw the possibility of building something better from the wreckage. She wasn't just an investor, she was an architect. And sometimes the most magnificent structures are the ones built upon the foundations of a necessary ruin. This was no longer just about a $200 million investment. It was about proving a principle that in the ruthless world of finance and technology, character was and would always be the ultimate capital. Callista's story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't found in a billionaire's bank account or a condescending remark, but in the quiet dignity of character. It teaches us that worth isn't defined by a uniform, an accent, or a job title, but by the integrity we show when we think no one is watching. The world is full of boardrooms and restaurants, and in every one of them, people are making choices that reveal who they truly are. Dieter and Tiffany chose arrogance and paid the ultimate price, while Callista and Leo chose integrity and built a better future. If you were moved by this journey from an underestimated waitress to a boardroom queen, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this story to spread the message that kindness and respect are the most valuable assets of all. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss our next story of justice, unexpected triumphs, and the incredible power of the human spirit. Thank you for listening.